We are glad, very glad, to have with us again our good friend, David Martin. And David, I think, is probably busier than anybody I know, just tearing around trying to save the world, doing all kinds of good things. And I thank God for David, thank God for his friendship. And he's here tonight to speak with us. And every time I've ever heard him speak, it's challenged me and stretched me and given me some good things to think about. And so I'm just honored to have him here. David, we love you very much. And let's welcome Dr. David Martin as he comes to preach to us. He sings, he dances, he gives lectures, he preaches.
All right. I found out I was coming here actually just not long ago, a couple days ago. So good news is we're all in for a surprise. I'm going to try to do something that is actually an exceptionally difficult thing to do, which is try to tell a love story where pretty much everything I'm talking about doesn't sound like love, which is kind of a hard thing to do. But I figured, why don't we try? And I'm going to actually run the risk of doing what, when I grew up in church, we had a tradition where the ministers would sit around a table and they would preach their way through the Bible, starting in Genesis, ending in Revelation. And ironically, if you get exposed to the Bible that often, a bad thing happens, which is you think you know the story. So you check out. Right, you actually check out because you go, yeah, I heard that one, I heard that one, heard that one. And the problem with that, and by the way, I'm not suggesting that you don't want to read the Bible. I'm simply saying, if you're going to do it, slow down. Slow down. Just slow down. Make sure you read what's on the page, not what you were told was on the page. Because if you make the mistake of actually reading it, you'll find out that the story we're told doesn't match the story. And that's a problem, because that means somebody did something which in the Bible is described as one of the only capital crimes you can do, which is to add or subtract a jot or a tittle. That's not your job. It's not my job. But unfortunately, that has been the job of what we have come to know as religion. Religion has done nothing but add jots and tittles and deception and corruption and lies and hyperbole and mythology, and it has added it to the expense of all of you. And I'm going to tell you a love story you've never heard because you haven't read it slow enough. How about that? Now, the bad news is if you want to double check on anything I say, just like when I talk about how bad Anthony Fauci is, the good news is I'm going to give you the references, so go read them. Go read them. See if what I'm saying is actually true. Because if it isn't, then I've got a problem. But if it is, then you have a problem. And that's a problem. So one of the two of us is walking out of here with a problem. How about that? Not every day you start, but it's Saturday night. It's not Sunday morning. I can get away with a little bit. How many of you think you know the story of Noah's Ark? Think you know the story of Noah's Ark? Just raise your hand. This is a sucker. This is a terrible thing to do because you're going to raise your hand and then you're going to find out I'm just going to kick the bottom right out from under that story. But that's the whole setup here. That is the setup. Because if you actually start in Genesis 6 and you start looking at the story of Noah's Ark, there's an interesting thing that you're told. And that is that apparently the children, the men, the sons of God, were having sex with the women of men. Did you hear what I just said? We actually started the story of the ark and of Noah with a story of sexual shame and defilement. That's what started the story. And according to the story, as we are told in the Bible, we are told that God was angry. So much so that 4 short chapters of the book of Genesis, after he got done creating man and saying he was good, God says, according to the story, that he was disappointed that he ever created them and they should be wiped off the face of the earth. Does that sound like a God you'd want to praise? Does it? The God that allegedly created people 4 chapters earlier. And by the way, we're not running too much time. We got a couple crazy named people that lived a couple hundred years in there, but we're not talking about a long time. We're talking about 4 chapters in the story. We go from creation was good to I'm disappointed and I want to wipe them all out. Does that sound like a love story to you? You know why it doesn't sound like a love story? Because it isn't a love story. It's a lust story. It's a lust story. It was a story about a God, not the God, a God that was created in the image of the people telling the story. Because God didn't make a mistake in 4 chapters. It's just not true. And by the way, what's a Nephilim? Anybody? Sounds like a heffalump. Sounds like something we encounter in a Disney movie. Kind of a purple bow tie wearing elephant. We don't know what they are. We've been told they're giants. Giants. Some people estimate 12 feet tall, 20 feet tall. Giants who allegedly were coming down and finding the women of earth attractive, having children, and messing up the whole plan. Except for if there was a plan, why was all that happening? If you're going to create a thing, don't you have an operating manual that goes, hey, 12-foot tall guys, 5-foot tall girls, bad idea. Unless you're in the NBA, in which case it's still a bad idea. Right? You'd have an operating manual. And here's the problem with this story. The further we get into the story, we find out that an angry God is actually going to wipe out everything that was declared good 4 chapters earlier. Does that sound true to you? Does it sound true? And the tragedy is, it doesn't sound true because it isn't. If you go back and look at the history of this story, you actually find out that this story has at least 5 versions that predate the story that was written down in that book. 5 different stories, all of which have an angry deity in one case, an angry war between planets in another case, an angry war between gods and people on earth in another place. In another story, hybrids that came down and manipulated the DNA of human beings and everything else. We have so many stories, and guess what? In Genesis chapter 6, Genesis chapter 7, and Genesis chapter 8, we decided to mash up a bunch of stories so that we could actually tell a story that isn't a love story. It's a story of an angry God that destroyed the world. Could I have my first slide? Most of you don't know what the picture is in the background of this slide. But the reason why I put this picture up is because I want to end this story with the love story. This is Mount Ararat. This is the story. This is the mountain where the ark, as we were told, supposedly wound up at the end of the story, the punchline of the story. That's Mount Ararat. That currently sits in the disputed regions of Armenia and Turkey and and various parts of Russia who like to kind of weigh in on who gets to control that mountain. But it's actually a very interesting mountain, and I'm going to end this presentation with a love story. But I thought it would be nice to have a pretty picture if you're going to end the story with a love story. But you'll notice that the title of this presentation is very important. It's called The Armada of Arks. Now, how many of you know what an armada is? That's a bunch of boats, not some boats. That's not a fleet. What's an armada? Armada is you're serious. You mean business. It's not I'm going to send out a little expeditionary thing. Nah, it's not I'm going to send out a kind of carrier group. Nah, an armada is I'm sending out the Navy, baby. And everybody's coming. Little boats, big boats, aircraft carriers, everything. Everything is coming. Because why? It's all on the line. So we're sending the fleet. Hold that thought. Feel that thought. We're not going to build a boat to save a few people. We're going to send the fleet. And we're going to save humanity. That's what we're going to do. How cool would that be? And why does that story exist nowhere in our telling? It exists nowhere in our telling because we want stories with winners and losers. And we want to be on the winning side, but we want to be really sure that we've got losers. But you know what? Somewhere along the line, the same God we say we follow said, judgment is mine. And guess what that means? That's not ours. It's not ours. Discernment, yeah. Wisdom, yeah. Judgment, nah. That's above all of our pay grade. It's above all of our pay grade. So we need to look at that picture, and we're going to come back to it. Because I'm going to tell you 3 stories of the near end of humanity. I'm going to tell you 3 stories. And I'm going to show you the key elements of those 3 stories. And I'm going to see if we can tell a more beautiful story tonight. How's that sound? See if we can tell a more beautiful story tonight. Let's get the next slide. I've said in many situations, apocalypses are grossly overrated. Now, what do I mean by that? If you go through human history, we've got tons of times when we were told that people were going to get all wiped out. There's going to be floods, there's going to be asteroids coming down, there's going to be wars, there's going to be famines, there's going to be all kinds of things. And like I said, apocalypses have all been overrated because we're still here. And there's actually a lot of us, in case you haven't checked. There's a lot of us, a lot of places around the world. So when it comes to everything's going to get wiped out, we kind of suck at telling that story. Now, we tell that story to engender fear. We tell that story because we want to sell electric vehicles because we believe there's something wrong with combusting hydrocarbons. Okay, cool. But guess what? Last time I checked, there's a lot of animals and there's a lot of plants that thrive on, are you ready for this? Carbon dioxide. So light it up, baby. Why? Because the combustion I make today is the food that the tree eats tomorrow. That's why. And that was a system that was created a doggone long time ago. And guess what? No governor of California is going to change it. It's just not going to change. But we also tell the story of apocalypses because we teach ourselves to fear so that we decide that we need the spirit of survival. We need to survive. We need to make sure we're protected. We need to make sure our families are protected. We need to make sure our group is protected. We need to make sure that we're protected. And what are we doing when we use the term survival? I'm going to submit to you that when you use that term, you're laughing in the face of an almighty, abundant God. You are laughing in the face of an almighty, abundantly producing God. Think about that. We weren't put on this planet with negligible resources to barely get along. We were put in a verdant, productive, abundant place. But how do we get to the story that ultimately says, I have to survive? Well, you start with the fuel that you have to put in the tank, which is wrath and anger. And by the way, I'm taking this right out of the story. The fuel for the story of fear, the fuel for the story of survival was wrath and anger. Does that sound like a love story to you? Doesn't sound like a love story to me, because it isn't a love story. It's a story that by its own definition says wrath and anger. And guess what never, ever has ever coexisted in any pure form? Wrath, anger, and love doesn't exist, because love is a force that cannot be defiled. And wrath and anger are listed as sins. They are listed as things that defile, which means you cannot have love and wrath and anger in the same energetic field. They do not coexist. Love is. Wrath and anger are the fuel that fuels judgment, and judgment is not ours. But we have to get there to survive. We have to be angry about something. And then what we have to do is we have to decide who's in and who's out. Now, this is the part that I found funny, because I've told you I've read the Bible way too many times that I can even count. I do not know how many times I've been through that book, and I'll tell you something. It wasn't until getting ready for this particular presentation that I actually stumbled across something that I thought was kind of fascinating. And this, by the way, is part of the way you know that the story couldn't have been actually coexistent with the actual story. Because it turns out that Noah was supposed to take how many animals? Go ahead, say it out loud. We all got it from Bible school. 2 of each kind, right? 2 of each kind, 2 of each kind, 2 of each kind. No, wrong. You know what he was supposed to do? Take 7 pairs of clean animals, 7 pairs of clean animals, and only 1 pair of unclean animals. Uh-oh. Dave, I got a problem with this story now, because I don't have clean and unclean animals yet. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. In fact, I have to wait a long time in the Bible, if we're going to use it as the reference, to even get to the concept of clean and unclean. Because last time I read, 4 chapters earlier, they were all good. Do you remember that part? So how did all good in 4 chapters just get erased and introduce a concept that didn't get introduced historically for at least 2,000 years after the thing that I'm reading the story about? How did that happen? Ooh, that sounds like somebody edited a story. You know why? Because they did. Noah was not told to take 7 pairs of clean and 1 pair of unclean anything. He was told, build an ark to actually save the animals. That's what he was told. And people who wrote the story 2,000 years later added the bits that helped tell their story. Uh-oh. That sucks. But unfortunately, the evidence in the book we are referring to proves this point. That's a problem. It's just a problem. And see, these are the kinds of problems we're encouraged not to think about. We're encouraged not to think about this because if this part might be off, then maybe some other things might be off, and that would be a problem. So we don't want to face that problem. But that's because we're being distracted from a loving story of a divine creator who said 4 chapters earlier that it was good. Shall we keep going? Because it's going to get more fun. This is my favorite of all. The motivation for the flood was creator regret. Now let's play out the tape for a second. Remember the reason why we allegedly were created in the first place? We were supposedly created to be God's company. That's why we were created. In case anybody has any question. We were originally created, according to the story, to be God's company. And I'm taking liberties with the English translation, but that's exactly what it says. Which then begs the question, if you wanted company, like think about this at your own house. Let's say you invited people over for dinner and they bothered to come because you invited them. That's why they came. You had something to do with this, right? You invited people over. And when you get there, you're upset that they actually accepted your invitation. There are a few people in my life where that's been the case. Where I invited them out of obligation. I kind of wish they said no. They came anyhow. And I really wish that they hadn't come. But that's a very small number of people. I can count them probably on one hand. Most of the time, if I go to the trouble of inviting people to my house and actually saying, I'd like to have you over for dinner, when they show up, I celebrate that. I don't go, oh, it's you. Well, I didn't want you. I wanted the other friends. Create a regret. And this regretful creator does what? Punishes his creation. Did you get that? Punishes his creation for doing what? For showing up? So now it's worse, right? Now I'm inviting you over, and I have a beautiful spread on the table, and I say, well, here's what's going to happen. What's going to happen is I really didn't want you here anyhow, but since you're here, while Kim and I are eating this beautiful dinner I've laid out, I'd like to have you, let's see, if you could mow the yard. And then after you mow the yard, I have a hornet's nest that I'd like you to knock down. And after you knock down the hornet's nest, I'd like you to go ahead and clean the toilets while I'm eating because I invited you over. Now, Lou is all about that. That's what the workday is. Don't be deceived, right? This workday thing, I mean, he brought Cheryl up and I saw the whole thing. I saw through it, right? That workday thing, they're saying, oh, come and meet friends and clean the toilets. That's okay. But we know we've got a little bit of a problem when the person who's punished for the regret is the person who was invited to the party the first time. That doesn't sound remotely true. And it doesn't sound like a love story. You know why? Because it isn't a love story. That's why it doesn't sound like one. And you'll notice that I'm doing this in slow motion to start drilling something into your head. You've been hypnotized to believe that you have to just overlook these stories because God has to be love and God has to be lovable and God has to be this little plush toy that we can sit there and go, oh my goodness, it's so exciting, I can't believe. And sometimes there are parts of the story that feel like maybe that's not a good thing. And this is a part of the story that's not a good thing. If you create a thing, then you hate it, and then you decide to punish it for what you did, that's a pretty big mistake. By the way, and we're supposed to never ask these questions. We're supposed to sit there going, oh, but I'm sure there's a mystery in this. And courtesy of the Apostle Paul, who is also the mass-murdering psychopath Saul, that guy, who actually gave us half of what we call the New Testament, that guy says that if it's confusing, we're supposed to just accept that it's the mind of God. No. We also had minds, and God actually gave us minds to discern the difference between truth and falsehood. That's why we have minds. So it turns out that when I say, hey, there's a problem with the story, there's a problem because the exact same being that 4 chapters earlier said everything that was created was good, which, by the way, was the Word of God, when told through the story of men, turned into an angry God that killed people. See the difference? Do you see the difference? If you don't see the difference, you're missing something pretty important. Because it turns out that even at the end of the story of Noah, and by the way, why was Noah chosen? Oh, because Noah's a good guy. Woohoo! Except for the end of the story, where it actually ends the whole story with the children of men are inclined to evil. Did you hear what I just said? That the happy ending to the story of redemption and salvation was you still suck. That's not a love story. You can't make it a love story. And you can't make it a love story because none of the elements are love. None of them. Not some of them, none of them. And just if you weren't feeling bad enough, I'd like you to take a trip down memory lane. I'd like you to jump forward, just a couple chapters forward, and we're going to go to Genesis 37 to 47, because I'm going to take you to the next apocalypse. If we could jump to that next slide. We go from a world where there were swirling forces. There was the Spirit that passed over those swirling forces and spoke light into existence, and then spoke matter into existence, and then spoke plants and all kinds of growing things, and then spoke the sun and the stars and the moon, and spoke all of these things into existence, and then created these beautiful things that cover the face of the earth, the animals and all of these quadrupeds and slithering things and all kinds of wonderful things. And then at the crescendo of that story, we actually have the breath of life being breathed into clay. And it says, and man became a living soul. That's the story. That's the story that we started with. And that story is punctuated with God saying, it's good. It's fit. Everything is in order. 4 chapters later, we get the giant reset button. Bing, flood, boom, everything's gone. And then a couple short chapters later, we run into a story that has fascinated me endlessly. For the simple reason is it is the extreme and exact mechanism whereby the forces of darkness today created the Federal Reserve in 1910. Now, most of you are not familiar with history enough to know why on earth I'm saying Joseph in Egypt is in fact the creation of the Federal Reserve, but stay with me because I'll explain why. If any of you are familiar with the story, and by the way, I'm not talking about the story of the Potiphar's wife, and I'm not talking about the interpretation of the baker and the candlestick maker, and I'm not talking about all of those things. I'm talking about Joseph's stewardship in the 7 years of plenty leading up to the 7 years of famine. The next apocalypse that we're told about, right? It's the next apocalypse. And the next apocalypse is everybody's going to die of starvation. Except Joseph comes along, and after interpreting Pharaoh's dreams, is made a grand vizier of Egypt. And with that title of grand vizier, he actually goes through and he harvests all of the plenty from all of Egypt so that we can actually survive the coming famine, right? 7 fat cows, 7 skinny cows. You remember the story? 7 full heads of wheat, 7 frail heads that don't even have wheat in the husks. Remember that story, right? So that's where we are. And then what does Joseph do to save the people? Right? This is the second ark story. Well, he starts by taking all of their gold. All of it. Takes all your money. Does this start to sound familiar? Like, I don't know, there's a group in Switzerland that's actually writing a playbook on the exact same playbook right now. Let's take all your money. Well, don't worry, we'll give you digital currency. We'll give you crypto. In this case, crypto meant tombs and mummies, but same thing. Ironic that we call it crypto, isn't it? See, I love how slow that joke rolled. That joke kind of started and it kind of rolled, but then then you got it and you're like, oh, haha, that part, yes. So he started by taking all of the gold of all of the Egyptians, and after he had taken all their gold, you know what he took next? He took all their means of production. You know what that is called? Communism. Did you hear what I just said? By the way, this is the man of God who's going to save us. Remember, this is a man appointed by God to save us. Starts by taking all your gold and then introduces communism. Woohoo! That sounds like a great recipe, and we're only on day 2. So what happens in day 3? He actually takes prophetic insight. He, Joseph, is now the one who's going to tell people what to do, when to do it. Does that sound like, Let's see, we went from taking all your money to communism. It almost sounds like you're becoming a dictator. Oh, that's because what you're doing is you're actually mistaking you, Joseph, for the person with the insight rather than, hey, Joseph, you know, remember what you used to be? You used to be prophetic. You used to realize your job was to be a vessel of divine information, not the source of divine information. But do you see how subtle it is to slip and start thinking that you are the one with the information rather than, oh, you know what? I'm a vessel through which information is coming. And Joseph became Joseph Inc. rather than Joseph the prophetic. And what happens next? He takes all of the caloric commerce of Egypt and takes it over. He tells you when you can have bread, when you can have food, when you can have milk, when you can have animals, when you can have everything. He takes 100% of the caloric commerce and he takes over all of that. Then, as the final assault, and unless you read the Bible carefully, you don't understand how defiled this next to last step is, but he takes all of the cattle and the land. What's the cattle in the land? What is that in Genesis 42 and 45? What is the cattle in the land in that period of time? That's the means of productivity for future generations. That is the means of taking part in the abundant creation. That's the means of becoming a steward of the abundant creation that was stewarded to us just a few short chapters earlier. And he takes it all. All. Not some of it. He takes all of it, which means the entire future of humanity is riding on the capricious whims of one man. Does that sound like a love story? How many women in the room would love to actually know that the entirety of your life would be decided for you on the capricious whims of one man? I can only ask that question rhetorically because Kim is 3,000 miles away. If she was standing here and she said, that's not even rhetorically funny, she would come and tear me off the stage. I'm only doing this in the safety of the distance. No, I'm joking, right? I'm joking because no one in a love story should ever be solely and 100% at the capricious whim of anyone else. That's not love, and that's certainly not a love story. Which gives us what? We didn't even make it 2 generations until the children of Israel who lived in the land of Goshen, which was the most verdant land of all of Egypt, were what? Slaves. Oh, and by the way, you want to hear the end of this story, which is a really fun end of this one too. And Joseph instituted a 20% flat tax. By the way, I'm ripping this right out of the Bible. Don't think that I'm editorializing. A 20% flat tax on every means of production for perpetuity. It actually says that in the Bible. It says, which is still due to this day. So let me get this straight. So far we have 2 stories of apocalypses, 2 stories of divine intervention to allegedly save humanity. One of them ends with people are prone to evil, and the second one ends with slavery and perpetual taxation. How are we feeling so far about our apocalypse stories about divine intervention to save us from impending doom? Guess what? Every one of these stories makes the doom worse. Worse. And by the way, that's not my opinion. Read the first couple chapters of the book of Exodus, and you find out that when the children of Israel finally worked their way out of slavery, a small percentage of them, they're in the wilderness for about a week, and you know what they said? We want to go back to being slaves because we'd rather be slaves and have 3 squares a day than actually be liberated. That's what the Ark story tells us. That's what the apocalypse story tells us. And that is what the God of survival and fear and wrath and anger deliver to us. Kind of a bummer. Because we are New Testament Christians, have decided to whitewash this story so we don't have to deal with the uncomfortability of it. Well, guess what I'm doing right now? I'm giving us the opportunity to read the actual story that we say has truth in it. Now, you can have it your way. I'm either right, I told you this, and this is true, or I'm wrong, and you're right, in which case I'm not telling the truth. But here's the tiny problem. I gave you the references. Go read it. And the bummer is you're going to find out the answer. I didn't put a spin on any of this story, not at all. Which leads us to a very interesting problem, which is the next slide. What if we were to tell a story that's a love story? A story of thrival. A little play on words. Rather than survival. What if we told a story that actually happened to be true? And by the way, I'm using true in both proper noun, capital T sense, and true also in the lowercase, just true. It's just truth. What if we lived in a world that was abundant? Anybody feel like that's a possibility, that maybe we live in a world that's abundant? Anybody? By the way, if you don't believe that, I don't care. It is, whether you agree with it or not. So the good news is your assent doesn't matter, because the Almighty has decided you don't, and your opinion don't matter in this particular situation. You're going to be taken care of whether you like it or not. The sun will shine on the just and the unjust. The seeds will grow for the just and the unjust. Guess what? You might not like it, but it doesn't care, because it has zero concern about whether you're on board with the program. Because it doesn't care whether you're on board with the program, because it's going to be good to you no matter what. That sucks when you want to be on the winning team, because then that means the losing team can still also play. Maybe because we're supposed to be maybe inviting some of that team to another team. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. Maybe we're supposed to be modeling love so that we actually are seen as love, which is maybe the reason why people would be attracted to us. But, that's just kind of crazy talk. That's new agey talk. That's crazy new agey talk. Or maybe it's actually right out of the same book I'm referencing. How about that? What if, rather than being predisposed to evil, we all are equipped for good? What about that? Wouldn't that be a bummer? Wouldn't it be a bummer if Cheryl could stand up here and by edict make you all skilled workers with nothing more than her royal sweep of a hand? Did you see that? Just like this. Whoosh. And you all became skilled workers. Amazing. It's like Moses parting the Red Sea almost. Just making you all competent to do the things that Lou wants you to do. What if we were equipped for good? What if we were provisioned? What if a master was here and called his servants together, and to some he gave 1 talent, and to some he gave 2, and then to some others he gave 5. And what if he just went away for a while? What if he did that? And I think maybe a few of us know the story, that maybe what happens is you were equipped, you were given your 1, you were given your 2, your 5, whatever you were given that. You were entrusted with it. You know why? Because the almighty wisdom that actually put you on this planet actually trusted that you would be a good steward with whatever you were provided with. Dave, that's heresy. We're all bad. No. In fact, the reason why I keep obsessing about this point is that in all the stories that I talked about, which were anger, wrath, evil, vengeful, those were human stories describing a God, but the God stories actually don't have the same story. As a matter of fact, all of them talk about being equipped for good, being fit for service, being entrusted with the stewardship of an abundant world. That's what the actual human stories told by God to humans are about. And humans, dissatisfied with that, decide to tell a story of a vengeful, judgmental, punishing, cruel, disgusting, harmful, destructive God. Do you see the difference? By the way, I defy any of you to read any part of the Bible and not find this problem. The problem is when we tell the story of what we think we heard, we suck at that story. Because we tell a story of what we would do if we were God. That's the story we tell. We don't listen to the evidence of what's actually said to us. I'm going away. I've given you enough. What's enough? 1, 2, 5. What's enough? It's enough. That's what enough is. And your job is not to actually bury it and hoard it and make sure I got it protected and I got my guns to make sure nobody touches it. No, my job is to actually say, I have this. Now, what can I do to make it more plentiful? For what? For what? Restoration and recovery. Restoration and recovery. Recovery of sight to the blind, the ability for the lame to walk, the ability for the hungry to be fed, the ability for the naked to be clothed. My job is not to make sure I have the coolest shirt that looks like Pastor Dave, even though I do. My job is to make sure I take what's entrusted to me and make it more beautiful. How many of you are married or in a relationship or have been married or have been in a relationship? That's beautiful. I want to encourage you tonight, when you think about your relationship, to ask yourself a simple question. Are you in it for what you get out of it? Or are you in it for what you can contribute to your partner? Do you see, even what happens with the stories we tell, unfortunately contaminates the stories we tell to each other. If we believe in a world where we have to worry about our own survival or our own thriving or our own interests, then what we do is we take and we take and we want to take. We want to be in this for what we get out of it. But that's not what this story is about. This story is about I'm entrusted with something. And my job is to actually take it and improve it. What did Jesus say? These are the things I've done, and you will then do what? Even greater things. How many of you feel like Jesus is the low bar of your expectations? By the way, that's where he put himself. Be clear. That's where he put himself. He said, I'm doing this to show you what's possible. You will see my bet and raise it. I don't think Jesus played poker, but there were 12 disciples, and tables kind of work out that way. I don't know. Maybe. But do you see what I'm saying? Do you see what I'm saying? The actual words spoken to us by and through the divine are words of love and provisioning and abundance and mercy and grace and flourishing. And when we decide that we need to take care of ourselves, when we decide it's only about our survival, when we say it's only about our success, what do? We actually destroy what was divine. We defile what was pure. Which leads me to the Armada of Arks. What if we, sitting in this room tonight, have been called to our master? What if our master has given to each of us, in some cases 1, in some cases 2, in one case, maybe or a few cases, 5 or more? What if the master's given those to us? And what if the master left? By the way, this is a part of the story that's really tricky. It doesn't say where, and it doesn't say how long. It's very frustrating, isn't it? You kind of want, like, you're gone for a week, or like, is it a month? And by the way, Jesus answered that question. He said, I'm not going to tell you. So I don't know if you need help on this, but if you were told you're not going to get the answer, guess what? Don't ask the person who said, I'm not going to tell you, to tell you. That's disrespectful. I'm serious about that. Don't ask. You were told not to. What you were told was, you're provisioned, and now I'm going to go away for a while. And by the way, it doesn't say that he was told they were going to come back. It just says the master left. This is making it harder, Dave. You're not making this Saturday night more easy for me. Yeah, because it is not easy until you get the punchline of a love story. Because if you get the punchline of the love story, you'll see that it's the most easy thing in the world. What if all of us were provisioned? What if we had abundance? What if we were entrusted stewards? What if we were equipped for good? What if there was enough? What if our mission was restoration and recovery? What if our mission was very explicitly said, on earth as it is in heaven? What if that was the mission that we were given? And what if right now we woke up this Saturday night and realized, oh my goodness, maybe we have been entrusted with solving our own problem? Did that ever occur to you? That maybe our inaction is the problem. Maybe what we are being invited to do is actually go, hold on a second, team. The coach is off the field for a while. Let's see if we can bring up our game, which is exactly what I'm going to propose to you tonight. I think we need an Armada of Arks. What does that look like? I think we need to make sure that when we design for what is coming, and by the way, don't think for a minute it's not coming. I can guarantee you, whether you follow Martin Armstrong's projections or mine or anybody else's, what you know is between 2028 and 2032, the world as we know it will actually go through a calamitous change. And if, by the way, you have any questions about that, I've addressed that many different ways. But we can't make it past 2032 without a total political and economic collapse. That's going to happen. And I'm not being a prophet. I'm actually reading the financial statements of the people who actually collapsed the system. So that's why I'm saying it. This is not prophetic. It's literate. So what if, rather than waiting for some sort of mythical creature in the sky, a horse of the apocalypse, or I don't know, a Gandalf-type creature with a staff, or somebody who has a scimitar and a rock that we can pull out, what if all those stories have been there to distract us? What if our story is, let's we the people figure out how to actually tell a different story? And what would the love story be? The love story would be, I don't know, this crazy guy from Virginia would go out of his way on a Saturday night in between important meetings in Sacramento and San Francisco, and he'd stand in front of a group in Yuba City, California, where abundant chickens are nearly mythological. And he would say, hey, what if we learned from all the old stories? What if we learned from them? Don't throw them out, because they're there to instruct us. That's why they're there. Remember, and this is the punchline of the love story, sometimes you're told information so you don't reproduce the problem. Oh, that was a twist you didn't see coming. You thought I was throwing all the stories out. No, I was actually suggesting that maybe we've been given a template of what not to do so that we can actually do what we should do. So let's go around the wheel, shall we? Let's make sure that we collectively tonight start thinking about enough food that we produce, enough energy that we can use to animate our equipment and our cars and our lives and our heating and everything else. What if we actually laid out a plan that said, wouldn't it be great if we had, I don't know, some energy companies or some things that could put energy into the system, some agriculture companies that put, and how much should we plan for, Dave? Well, the answer is, how big is your definition of neighbor? And by the way, if you don't know that story, read The Good Samaritan, because that story is about who's your real neighbor. And your real neighbor is everybody who you have the chance to help. Not who's next to you, everybody you have a chance to help. So guess what you're going to do? You're going to work harder to produce more to make sure your field effect is bigger. You're going to build an Armada of Arks. You're not going to put enough grain in the ship just for 7 giraffes, which, by the way, I'm assuming ate grain, or I don't know what they ate. Acacia tree tops. I don't know how you put that many acacia tree tops into an ark for 150 days. That's a lot of acacia tree tops. So I'm assuming that they at least I don't know, crushed oats or something. Help me if it's not something like that, because I don't know how you do it. Otherwise, that's a lot of tree tops. I like some of you get the mathematic geometric humor in that. That's actually a really interesting problem, because what some things eat are a lot of things that don't fit in a boat, the dimensions that we were told. It just, that doesn't work. So I'm distracted by that. We need to think about how big our field effect can be. How do we redefine a neighbor? And then we actually say it's not enough to just have the fields of Ararat. It's enough to have the walnut fields and then the rice groves and all the stuff that Lou does in all across Asia to make sure we get enough rice to go around and we get enough grain to go around and we get enough cattle and we get goats and we get all kinds of things to go around. Why? Because there's enough to go around if we build the abundance now, if we plan now, if we actually take action now. We will not be a slave. We will not be wiped out. We will be the place, the beacon on the hill that people go, that's what love is. And by their fruits they shall be known. By their fruits they shall be known. Not by what they told me, not by what they shoved down my throat and said, you have to accept, you have to believe. No, by their fruits they shall be known. What if our Armada produced an abundance where we said, open the doors of the granary, come in. And we're not going to take your gold. We're not going to institute communism. We're not going to institute a dictatorship. We're not going to institute the removal of your means of production. As a matter of fact, with the food that you get, we're going to give you seed grain to plant. What if we did that? What if we actually cared about a love story? And what if we, the people, finally looked at the Bible that we've been given and understand that it is for our instruction? And instruction includes what to do and what not to replicate. You know, I'm sick and tired of living in a world where you have to accept the lies to cover up for the mythology of what we want the truth to be. I'm tired of that. I think it's time that we grow up. You know, there's a reference in the New Testament that says sometimes you need to move from milk to meat. Well, this is a meat time. That's what this is. This is a meat time. We don't have to reject any of those stories. We have to learn from them. Do you see the difference? You see the difference? Because when you learn from them, you go, you know what? We don't need that outcome again. Because why do those stories all end with a clear statement of the horrifically bad outcome they all have? If we're smart, it's to warn us against repeating it. Abundant food, abundant energy, abundant definition of neighbor. What's the story we tell? We tell a story about people who are equipped for good. We actually trust others with this mission. So it expands. It's not our mission. It's not the Church of Glad Tidings, Inc. It's not the little group here in Yuba City. No, it's actually a template that we cookie cut all over the place. Why? Because we all are in this together. And one day the master returns and we will be held to account. And we should actually be encouraged by those words, not intimidated by them. What if, when the master returned, you heard the words, well done, good and faithful servant? What if you heard those words? And what if my job here tonight was to actually give you a taste of what that would feel like? What if you felt that? What if you felt a genuine gospel? You know what gospel is supposed to mean? Good news. You know what good news would be? Good news would be critical examination, deep reflection, thoughtful discernment, understanding truth, pursuing justice, pursuing liberty, pursuing the things that are of good. That's what we could be about. And if we did that, what happens next? We restore and we recover. Wouldn't it be good if we didn't have a mess when the master came back? That's an idea, right? Like, don't just leave a mess, right? Maybe actually clean the house up a bit so that when we get to the end of this story, we actually stop the most insidious part of the story altogether. What if we weren't living for heaven? What if we were living? What if we were living? What if we, the people, decided that the ultimate love story was a roadmap to love? And it was a roadmap to love that told us, if we take that path, it ends in destruction. If we take that path, it ends in slavery. If we take that path, it ends in Klaus Schwab World Economic Forum. You'll own nothing and be happy. Or maybe we, the few, the provisioned and the stewards, have been entrusted with much so that we'll be accountable for more. And tonight, I'd like you to join me in a fundamental commitment that between now and the time we hear the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant," between now and then, every thought we have is not building the ark to save us, not building the ark to save our family, not the ark to save the approved at the expense of the damned. I want us to build an armada of arks. I want every mountaintop to be filled with the glory and the abundance of a story where we earn the right to hear the words, "Well done." Thank you very much.